Earlier today, I spoke with the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, about all of this in the run-up to tomorrow's election. Here's that conversation. And here on Live Now from Fox, joining us to discuss the Georgia Senate runoffs happening is Secretary of State in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger. Secretary, thanks so much for being with us. Okay, the last day of early voting was on Friday. You're seeing historic early voting numbers and totals there in the state. What do you ascribe this to? How do you explain these record numbers?
I think voters are excited, really engaged in the process. We actually have 80,000 voters that showed up for the runoff race that never voted in the fall at all. So you just found that 80,000 more voters are engaged. So I think you're just seeing people are really engaged watching this race. They understand that even though it's 50-50, or is it going to be a 51-49, senatorial, it's really important. And that's why voters are turning out to vote for this race.
Okay, and can you kind of walk us through some of the tabulation, counting procedures? Many viewers, many Americans, many Georgians, will they get a result tomorrow night, do you think?
Oh, you'll get a result. Will it be the total result? The question you really have is how close is the race? Because you have your overseas military ballots that have to be, and they'll be accepted by Friday. So they have to come in by Friday. And then they're in one location, Cobb County. They were late in sending out some of their absentee ballots, so the judge gave them till Friday. But other than that, you have to also understand, unlike a lot of other states, only about 5% of all Georgians will vote absentee. So 95% are going to vote, in person. We have probably about 60%, that vote early, and then about 35% historically will vote tomorrow. And then we have 5% absentee. So we should be able to give you results. It's just a question of how close is it so we can say this is who the winner is. We have to wait for those last ones to come in from overseas military ballots.
Okay, we all followed the controversies surrounding some of these new election laws that are in place for this runoff, that they were passed by the legislature just last summer. And that one of those laws in particular condensed the window from the general midterm to the runoff. And so do you think that is maybe playing into the fact that we're seeing record turnout? Because we all remember back in 2020, that runoff took place in January of 21. So is that condensed time frame maybe some of these record numbers? Is that what's alluding to it?
Well, if you want to go back in time, historically, what we had is a 5-week runoff. Then our federal judge got involved and he said, no, for the UOCAVA ballots, because of the process you had, and they pushed the federal runoff out to 9 weeks. By going with ranked choice voting instant runoff for the UOCAVA ballots, we were allowed to get everything back, state runoffs and also federal runoffs, down to that same window of a 4-week runoff. And that's why we have all the runoffs will be 4 weeks after the November race. So that's why we are right now. So, and then we just have very energized voters on both sides of the aisle. We've had, two, former presidents engaged in this. The governor's engaged for Herschel Walker, out doing rallies with him, has a very effective TV ad right now. So people on both sides of the aisle are, really engaged.
I want to talk about some of those new election laws that are on the books. You heard from really prominent Democrats last year referring to some of those laws as Jim Crow 2.0, especially President Joe Biden, even Senator Raphael Warnock, and also Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams, when pressed during the midterm cycle about how do you square that with the record early voting, the record turnout, she said, quote, "We proved in 18, and it remains true that turnout does not dispel voter suppression." What do you think she means by that?
She has nothing to stand on, so she just starts making stuff up. And I guess we've shown that we have record registrations, record turnout. We had 4 million people show up back 4 years ago for the presidential race. We had 5 million. We had 4 million show up in the fall. We now have record early voting, and we're going to have strong turnout tomorrow. Again, voters have opportunities to vote. What we actually did with the voting process, we now have photo ID for all forms of voting. You want to vote absentee in Georgia, it's photo ID. That's something they've actually been doing in Minnesota and other Midwestern states for over 10 years now. We think that elevated security and obviously improved voter confidence in the process. We had 17 days of early voting in the fall race. We have 5 minimum days of early voting for this race here. And then many counties had Sunday and Saturday voting, so up to 7 days. And people can vote any choice they want. You can vote No excuse absentee voting, 5% choose to do that. You can vote in person early or in person tomorrow. We give voters options, but we make sure at the end of the day, we're going to do a risk limiting audit of a statewide race. We had a race that we chose in the fall race, and we did an audit of that, 95% risk limit audit. We're going to also do an audit of this race so we can verify the accuracy of this race so voters have confidence. Here's who the winner is, and this is the person that came up short.
Okay, let's talk about some of the political considerations. You, of course, are a Republican, but we all know in 2020, Georgia went blue for the first time in a generation, both at the Senate level and at the federal level with the presidential election. I know you can't really tell by just one election about where do you think Georgia is heading politically. But if the results come out tomorrow that Raphael Warnock gets a full term in the Senate, can you kind of more definitively say that Georgia is trending a little purplish, if you will, that hue is here to stay?
What I would say is that Georgia is a competitive state. And what the governor and I both showed, we had very strong victories in both of our races. I actually had the highest percentage over a Democrat, 9.2%. We both built broad-based coalitions, and that's the way forward for anyone that wants to win statewide in the state of Georgia. We're not an 80-20 state or 20-80, depending on how you look at it. We're a very competitive state, but that's why when you reach out and you have built broad-based coalitions, you do very well. And both the governor and I have shown how to do that.
Okay, I want to move from Georgia very quickly, if we can, to Arizona, where Live Now from Fox is based. Governor-elect Katie Hobbs, of course, is the Secretary of State here in Arizona, at least for the next couple of months until she's sworn in. Her opponent, Republican Kari Lake, the loser of that election, and some of her supporters have kind of issued these broadside, maybe bad faith attacks, saying that how can a Secretary of State certify her own win in another statewide race? Is there any credence to that?
I don't believe so, because 4 years ago, Stacey Abrams said that about Secretary of State Brian Kemp. How could he certify his own race? Meanwhile, people have to understand that the races typically across the nation are run by the counties. They're run by the counties. The counties certify their results, and then they push that up to the state level, and the Secretary of State is merely certifying that. What we're really looking for, were there any violations of state laws? And then we begin investigations. But I know that we pushed back against Stacey Abrams 4 years ago about her allegation that Secretary of State Brian Kemp couldn't certify his own race. There's nothing to support that idea.
Okay, because today in Arizona, Governor Doug Ducey, signed the canvass for all the counties, and so we also are learning that Katie Hobbs is going to recuse herself from representing the Secretary of State's office in any lawsuit related to the governor's race. So just last question on this. Secretaries of State don't count ballots in the state. Is that correct?
Exactly. And 4 years ago, Governor Kemp did step down. We had an interim Secretary of State for the last month, just so there was no question about that. And when I took office, I had 9 lawsuits from Stacey Abrams about her, stolen election claims were based on voter suppression. We pushed back hard for that for 4 years. And that's one of the reasons that she didn't do too well this time, that, the bloom came off that rose, because we're pushing back on facts. We're pushing back on truth for 4 years. The Georgia, it's never been easier to vote, but it is hard to cheat.
Okay. Secretary, last question for you. We're recording this the day before the runoffs. What will you be doing on the day of? Are you going to be pretty busy, I imagine?
Yes, I'll actually be voting early tomorrow morning, but then I'll be going down to our election headquarters, and we'll just be working on that, making sure that there's, the lines are short. State law also requires that all lines have to be shorter than 1 hour in November. The average time got down to 2 minutes. At one point, it's 3 minutes most of the day. Longest line I saw on the leaderboard was 14 or 16 minutes. So we really work hard so that voters have a very good experience when they come out to vote. They're not sitting out there in long lines. So we'll be tracking that and just tracking any other situations, any kind of calls that really require us to send out an investigator right away.
All right. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger there in Georgia. We appreciate your time. We'll talk again.
Thank you.